Hello, welcome to the final star ratings of the Perils in Paradise set. Today we're doing both Druid and Mage, and I actually think the combo of these two decks, and actually from, Warrior and Druid from last time, I think they're going to be some really strong decks. So we're also going to do the neutrals after all of that. So first and foremost, let's go to Druid, which completes the story of the Warrior class from the end of the last episode. Just as a reminder again, in case you're watching this on the day of the theory crafting stream for Play Hearthstone, that's currently ongoing as of today, which is the 17th when I'm recording it. And it's a chance to get 2 free packs if you watch for, I think it's like 4 hours, I can't remember now. It might only be 2 hours, don't quote me on that one. I've already got my drops for it. And already I know that some of my star ratings will be wrong, but I think these ones aren't too bad, if I say so myself. Anyway, I think there is 2 big packages for Druid. Possibly 3 if you're being a little bit memey. One of them is the Taunt package, which is Bouldering Buddy, Tutolan Traveler, Hydration Station, Dozing Dragon, and Hiking Trail, the location. I think that the Bouldering Buddy, the Tutolan Traveler, and the Hydration Station are the perfect accompaniments for your Taunt Warrior deck. Hydration Station is basically Hadronox's effect on a spell. Hadronox is one of the few cards that went into Wild and continued to be good in Wild for some time afterwards, so that's good enough for me. The Tutolan Traveler as well. You can sort of treat it like a 1-mana 1/5, right? It's got the stats and all the right places for a Taunt minion. You're going to play some big Taunt minions in your deck, and you're going to discount a Wensterosty or something, or a Ziliax. That coming out 2 turns early is going to be so frightening for some decks. It could be backbreaking. Literally, the Monstrosity against some decks, I think, will just be backbreaking. As a result of those things, I'm giving all of these cards 5 stars. I will say Bouldering Buddy, though, in my Theorycraft deck myself, I'm actually only running a 1 of that card in my deck, but I still think you will run it in your Taunt package. It's such a good card. Also, in terms of the draw 3 cards from different tribes, it meets the elemental requirements, which is very nice as well. The other 2 cards, Dozing Dragon and Hiking Trail, I think it's a bit of a meme. I know people have said this Hiking Trail package where you use Hiking Trail plus XB931 Housekeeper to complete the entire location in 1 turn and get 9 armor or whatever it works out to be. And like, oh, that's really good. And you could put all that into your sandwich as well. That's really cool, right? You Ride Cleaver, have Hiking Trail on board, you play the XB931 Housekeeper, bang, 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 bang with your Hiking Trail to fill up your sandwich of discovered Taunt minions. Then you finish your sandwich, nom 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 nom, big board of minions. I think it's going to be a meme because of the Ride Cleaver. Also, there is, in theory, a location deck you could run with Druid, because we'll see with the other legendary, they have something that rewards you for playing locations. And then there is the Seaside Giant, I think it's called, where it gets cheaper for every time a location is used. I think they are going to be memes, and I don't think you'll put Hiking Trail into your Taunt deck. You'll just put the good Taunt minions into your deck already, and then they can get buffed while they're in the deck, while they're in your hand. So for those reasons, I'm giving Hiking Trail 2 stars and Dozing Dragon 1 star. I actually really like Dozing Dragon as well. I think it's a very good card. I think it's a great arena card, for example. There's a lot of value in this little dragon. I just think, compared to the card quality of the other cards that will go into that set, it just won't make the cut. And then I couldn't think of another deck where I would put it into that could compete with this. So, as a result, I've given it 1 star. But it's not a bad card by any stretch of the imagination. I think it's really solid. Anyway, then on its own, I'm going to just deal with Cruise Captain Laura. 7 mana, 4/5, summon 2 random locations. Great for your location Druid deck. You can get the cheap dragons and you can get armor. Yeah, 1 star. I think this is just a complete meme of a deck. Maybe you throw it into some sort of Highlander Druid deck for some more value, I suppose, but having seen all the locations now, I think some of them are a little bit too oddly specific. You don't get to discover either, it's random. You could hit some really big low rolls, in which case you basically spend 7 mana for a 4/5, which is really bad in standard, so for all those reasons, I think it's just going to be a 1-star card. I just don't see the... I think it's called Seaside Giant. We're going to deal with it in a moment, but the giant that gets cheaper for every time you use the location, I honestly don't see it being played in this deck. I actually think it's more likely it's going to see you playing Death Knight with their location, which, by the way, in the Theory Crafting streams, still, like, tearing it up. It turns out that 15 damage in a location that can be used 5 times is actually really strong. Anyway, I digress. The other part of the package I'm going to just bundle together is this mana cheat, mana crystal gaining spell type package of Trail Mix, New Heights, Sleep Under the Stars, and Mista Vista, which is how I'm always going to pronounce this card. I think New Heights is basically the new form of Wild Growth. You get a mana ramp, you increase your max mana by 3. That is extremely good for Druid, it's extremely good for the combo decks, especially combo decks like the Alonius combo decks, which really struggled with getting the combo off because of the restriction of 10 mana. They have to jump through so many hoops to get the OTK off. At 13 or even 16 mana, or even, 19, 22 mana, it is so much easier to do those combos at those mana costs. So I just think New Heights is going to find its way into many decks. I also think it's going to be in the Druid Mage deck, which, by the way, with Mista Vista, I think a lot of people, and myself included, I struggle to rate this card because I think a lot of people see it as some sort of combo card that will kill your opponent. I actually think more often than not, Mista Vista is going to either give you some value in the form of armor, in the form of drawing cards. Basically, it's going to cast Sleep Under the Stars another time. It might cast New Heights another time. It might cast the Blossoming cards another time. I don't think you'll use it as some sort of OTK type deck. I don't think you'll play this and then play for 3 turns cards that potentially could go to the face, which you can somewhat do because Swipe always targets enemy minions, unlike some of the other spells. Because, by the way, this isn't targeted, it just goes off at random. So if you just say a card that does damage, sometimes it will hit your minions, unless it specifies your opponents, which there are a few cards that can do that. What I think the package is going to be as a whole, and again, if you've seen any of the theory crafting streams, you'll have seen this many times. I think you'll use the drinks, you'll use Concierge, you'll use Tide Pool, Pupil, you'll use the Go With The Flow as well. Maybe you'll put Owl in the deck, maybe you'll just use the Chia Drakes, and you're just going to accumulate a ton of spell damage onto the board, and basically Concierge is going to allow you to play about 30 cards for 0 mana in 1 turn, and you're going to explode your opponent with drinks and with swipes, and it's going to be disgusting, and basically Mista Vista is going to enable you to do that. Even if not for its effect, but by the fact that you need to get the Mage cards into your Druid deck to kill them. So for some of these reasons, New Heights I've given 5 stars. I think this is just going to be in so many Druid decks that I had to give it 5 stars. I think it'll be in the Warrior Druid deck as well, by the way, so that you can ramp into your big stuff early. That's the other reason why I've rated some of the mana cheating cards in Warrior a bit low, like the Right Cleaver and the Food Fight card, because I think you'll just use ramp cards instead to get to them earlier, and that's more consistent than praying you hit the right minion in your deck or praying your opponent doesn't have Rustrot Viper. Mista Vista and Sleep Under the Stars, I've actually given 4 stars to. I did say this, it's kind of running amok in the Theorycraft streams right now, this Druid deck. It has one big weakness though, and it's kind of the big weakness of Alonius Druid. If you race this deck, they are going to struggle to survive. Now, I will say, unlike Alonius Druid, where you really need to save the swipes, or as many swipes as you can to kill your opponent, you could probably burn some of the swipes for control purposes, so maybe it's a little bit more protected than the Alonius old version of the deck, but still, you don't want to be wasting your spells on dealing with minions, and I think in general you could just race this deck down, so I've actually put it into the tier 2 region. I think both Mista Vista and Sleep Under the Stars will get into that, which is kind of funny. I heard people talking like the Theorycraft stream, like on paper, 7 mana draw 6 cards is not that good. 7 mana gain 15 armor, not very good. 7 mana to refresh 9 mana crystals is actually pretty good, but the reason this card is really good is just because it's so flexible. If you need card draw, it can give you card draw. If you're about to die, it gives you armor. If you want to set up some sort of combo, you can get the refresh mana crystals, and maybe that's enough for you to play the next card you want to play. And you could just freely get, some extra armor or something. Because of this flexibility, I just think it's going to be ran in a few Druid decks. And for example, I think it will make this potential Owl, potential Mista Vista, vomit out all the 0-cost spells with Concierge deck. I think it's going to be at least a tier 2 deck. It may honestly push it beyond that. If it can live through the aggressive decks, and in particular, I'm a bit worried about the Pirate Demon Hunter archetype, where it's very hard to deal with the tokens since they charge and push their damage before you can deal with them. If it can survive through all of that, though, which actually Sleep Under the Stars might help you with, the 15 armor may be necessary, then I think this could be a tier 1 deck as well, but I think it's going to just fall short. Finally, Trail Mix, I've actually only given 1 star to. I get the benefit of Trail Mix. The idea is that you play this card early to ramp into a card that has more ramp in it, and you play that card and get the permanent mana crystal instead of the temporary ones. Simply put, Druid has so many good ways to get mana crystals right now that are permanent. I don't think Trail Mix will see any play. Splish Splash Whelp has come back into the the set as well. And that's coming as a 3 mana 3/2 now, with gain a mana crystal if you're holding a dragon. It kind of fits the trail mix kind of niche. It's also pretty close to New Heights as well. I think New Heights and Splish Splash Whelp will still see play. If you want to run a few dragons in your deck, obviously you'll play the Whelp and probably not the Heights. If you want to do some insane combo wombo, you'll probably play the Heights and not the Whelp. And I just think you won't put trail mix into any of these decks. But there is a nice theory as well with Mr. Vista casting your trail mixes, so maybe people will try it. I just don't think that will be the eventual end goal of the card. And finally, to complete the circle, we have Mage. Mage touristing in Paladin, the first card, it's the first class we did the reveals on. They have 2 distinct packages. They have this like tempo spell package with Seabreeze Chalice, Go with the Flow. These 2 cards I just talked about going into the Druid deck. Then they have Marooned Archmage to discount your first spell each turn. Tide Pool's the location that gives you more spells for every spell you cast. And Railer, which is a nice card that if you're vomiting out lots of cheap spells, gives you lots of reasonably good minions. Basically, I think these will end up going into 2 different packages. I think you'll have this tempo spell Mage Paladin deck, and I think Marooned Archmage and Railer the Sand Sculptor will both make that deck. And you'll instead use the Sunscreen cards to get lots of cheap spells to give you lots of 2-cost minions with Divine Shield, and hopefully that will take you over the threshold to kill your opponent. And it's basically just going to generate a board that's going to be hard to deal with, and maybe you can out-aggro them. You'll probably also be using some spells that are face spells, that freeze them, that just, hinder them in some way. And I think Marooned Archmage also helps you along this pathway. You're probably going to be running as well the Mantle Shapers as well. Maybe you're going to be running the Drinkies, but I think you're going to be running the Drinky from Paladin. I actually don't think you'll run Seabreeze Chalice or Go with the Flow in this tempo Spell Mage / Paladin deck. I think you'd rather just run the cheap Paladin cards instead. I think that's going to be a tier 3 deck, being generous. It probably is going to be tier 4 actually. I think it maybe is closer to 2 stars, but I don't give half stars on here, so I bumped up to 3 stars. I decided to be an optimist. Not so optimistic though that I gave Tide Pools only 2 stars. I don't think this card will actually make that deck. I think it's a little bit too slow to generate its value. I could see a world where if you could play I think it's called Dark Moon Sorcerer or something like that, where, when you cast a spell, you play a spell of a cost 1 more than that. If you could put that card in your deck, and you might put that card in your deck, maybe Tide Pools could actually serve some purpose then, because you're vomiting out a lot of spells then. And just indiscriminate value, eventually maybe you can kill your opponent with it. But I don't think you can run that card in your Tempo Spell Mage, because you might get Announced Darkness, and you basically just instantly die on the spot because that card is terrible. Anyway, I've given these 3 and 2 stars each. Now, Seabreeze Chalice and Go with the Flow, you may have noticed the pattern by now, they're getting 4 stars. They're going to go into the Druid package. If you can get Go with the Flow ×2 onto your Owl, that gives Owl +3 spell damage. He doubles spell damage. That turns him into 6 spell damage. If you're running this Owl package and you're running that with the Concert... What's he called? Or she called? I forgot her name. The one that copies a minion on the field for a battle cry and turns it into a 3/3. If you do that onto the Owl, which has the +3 spell damage, it turns into +6 spell damage and doubles it again. That turns into 24 spell damage. With Seabreeze Chalices, you can see a world where you're getting to +100 damage, and that is going to kill anyone regardless of what their board state is at that point. Also, there is a world where you're just going to use this, and I think this is what most people did in the theory crafting. You're just going to use Cheer Drakes instead. You're going to use the doll houses as well. And you're going to accumulate lots of little spell damage on the board. Then you're going to play your Concierge. You're going to play your Tide Pool, Pupil, get more Seabreeze Chalices, get more Goes with the Flow as well, just generate a ton of spell damage, and you're just going to machine gun people down with potentially 12 Seabreeze Chalices at some point in the game. Also, if you can play a Seabreeze Chalice into your Mr. Vista turns, you'll get the Seabreeze Chalice effect again via Mr. Vista, and you'll get the drink from it, because it counts as playing the cards, so you'll get the 2 drink left variant, which could be important if, you're trying to get every little bit of damage, or you're forced to use these chalices to deal with some sort of aggro deck. So yeah, I think these are going to be 4 stars. I think that deck is going to be pretty hard to play, if only because you're going to play so many cards that the animations might cause you not to be able to win. That legitimately might be the biggest downside to that deck. It can't deal with aggro, and also the animations might take so long that you might not be able to OTK with it. I saw a few people struggling with that, and players in the, the Theorycraft stream Normally pretty good at these miracle type of decks. They normally have good APM, unlike my Boomer APM. So this might be a deck that I'm not very good at, but we'll see when it comes out. Anyway, the final package I would say for Mage is Big Spell Mage. We have Under the Sea, Cephalopods, Tsunami, and King Tide. Big Spell Mage, when it was the Grey Parrot and Puzzle Box of Yogg-Saron, with the Drake Flame Amulet, or whatever it's called, one of my favourite decks of all time. You played your minions to try and survive until you could get to the point you play your expensive spells, and then you tried to like repeat the expensive spells over and over again, and you would just outvalue your opponent from there. Is this the second coming of Big Spell Mage? No, I don't think it is. I still don't think the package is quite good enough. I think you have to run this Big Spell package as the Mage as the default class, because you basically need to have access to Sunset Volley. I think that is the best spell you can currently cheat out in Mage. They're just missing something else. The Tsunami is pretty nice, but it's just not quite like, you know, 2 giant dragons as it once was. For those reasons, I think you're going to sit somewhere around a tier 3 deck. I really like Cephalopods as well. The other thing that's missing from that deck is they don't quite have as much value, because they don't have the Grey Sage Pirates to repeat the spells over again, nor do you have Bran in there to Bran your parrot to get twice the amount of insane spells again. For those reasons, I think you're going to run out of value against some decks, and the control decks will just demolish you, and then you'll struggle to live versus the aggro decks. I don't think the early game minions are as good as they were in the past. But maybe if you can get to these Under the Sea plays, your 6 mana, potentially like 8/8, with no effect on it, maybe you can live through that. Cephalopods, maybe you can cheat out a nice Sunset Volley, get a 12/12 or something. Maybe that's good enough. I don't think it will be, sadly. King Tide, on the other hand, I think it's actually worse. I've actually only given this 2 stars. I don't think you'll run King Tide in your Big Spell Mage deck. Right, let me get to this card. If you play this card on curve, aka if you play it on turn 4, this card is better for your opponent than for you, because you're not going to be able to play a spell for 5, right? Your opponent, though, it will flip to their turn. They might have 5 mana crystals depending on the order, you know, of the game. At the very least, they could coin... No, they couldn't coin into a 5, right? The coin would be 5. Alright, there's potential world where this card is better for your opponent then. It's a 50-50 depending on who starts the game first. But either way, they might get to play their 5-cost spell before you. And then your 5-cost spells, which, you know, are big spells, then have to be used to, like, react to the original ones. So there is that world where this is bad. Now, I think this only scenario happens into a control matchup, because the aggro decks aren't going to be running big spells. Cool, right? The best case scenario then is King Tide. You play it for a 4 mana 4/4, which is a bad card. Next turn you get one of these cards discounted to 5, and you play it on curve. Cool. I just don't think that is a big enough cheat. The world where I think this is actually going to be best right now is as a, like a, what's the word for it? As like a tech card versus any deck that's going to cast a ton of spells, aka all these Sea Breeze, Chalice, Drinky, Bustle Drink decks. You might want to play King Tide, acknowledging your opponent is probably going to try and go off on the next turn, and you just immediately stop them in their tracks. That being said, you're probably just going to use Stomper or something instead, or the what's it called, the Acolyte of whatever it is that makes spells cost 1 more as well. You'll probably just run them instead of the King Tide. They have a similar effect without the potential downside of King Tide. So I think there's like I think King Tide has very few upsides, and honestly I don't think a lot of the mage spells that you can cheat out on 5 are necessarily that great. I think the aggro decks will probably be like beating you down by the time you're playing King Tide, so for those reasons I've only put it in the 2-star range. Finally, we have Rising Waves even, which I don't think fits really into any of these archetypes per se. It's 2 small spells going to Big Spell Mage. It hits your own board, which is not ideal when you want to build a board with Rayla. So I think this will see some play in some other deck. I did potentially have this in an early iteration of my Druid deck, in the Druid Mage deck, because I did mention that Druid would like some sort of big board removal that isn't swipe, so they can use their swipes to go to the face. However, I think because of Seabreeze Chalice's existence and go with the flow synergy, I don't think you'll put Rising Waves in that deck. I think you'll actually just use the swipes as control cards instead. So I don't think Rising Waves will see play in many decks. It might see play though in Spell Mage or No Minion Mage deck. For that reason I've given it 3 stars, because that's a tier 3 deck right now. That is all the class minions done. What do you think? Okay, let's see the neutral minions as well. Before we actually get into the neutral minions though, this card was re-added to the core set, Demolition Renovator. This was from, I think it was from Murder in Castle Nathria. I believe as well, don't quote me on this one, didn't it used to be 5 mana 5/5? Anyway, I think they've discounted to 3 mana 3/3, which is much closer to a Rust Rot Viper-like effect. And it's clearly meant for a tech card to destroy locations. Now, I did say this in the last episode, I think I've got one of the locations wrong. I think the Death Knight card is actually very good, the location. I think it should be close to a 4-star card. You might want to put a Demolition Renovator, therefore, into your deck as a tech card against something like that Death Knight location doing 15 damage to you at some point. Admittedly, it's kind of hard to stop it because it's reusable, so your opponent will just play it on a turn where they can reuse it instead. I think in general, though, there's not many incredible locations to destroy. I would say probably the other best one is hitting Dollhouse, the magical Dollhouse from Druid, because they often put that location up early and then just leave it onto the board until they can do a combo later in the game. This 3 mana 3/3 Destroyer Dollhouse might actually be good enough to see some play. So I've given it 2 stars. I think some decks will take this in. At the very least, it might see some play inside some people's ETCs. So I decided to rate this because I did rate all the core set cards when we did the core set rotation, and this is staying in until the next rotation. So I decided to give this its own little page for ratings. Anyway, let's get to the actual new neutral cards. Instead of how I've done all the other cards, I'm just going to band these together now as 5-star, 4-star, 3-star, 2-star, and 1-star. And actually, I've got quite a lot of 5-star cards to go through. Obviously, I can cheat with one of them. Marin the Manager was the pre-release minion for this set. I know already that this is a 5-star card because it's seen play in a tier 1 deck. And I think it's going to see more play in other tier 1 decks. I think you're going to put this in your Taunt Warrior deck just because drawing 3 cards that cost 0 is really good in a deck with a high mana curve. So I think that will get into that deck. And it's also been seen play in Druid right now. And I think we'll continue to see play in this combo Druid-esque deck. So very easy to rate this one 5 stars because I know it's a 5-star card. The other cards, though, that I've given 5 stars to, Gorgon Zormu, I think is honestly the equivalent of Astalor in terms of quality. It's going to be one of those cards you just put into every single deck. You'll like build your deck, you'll have 24 cards wherever it's in your deck for all the combos you want to do. It's like, I have to put 6 more cards in my deck. I'll put a Gorgon Zormu in the deck, I'll put a Ziliax in the deck. It's going to be that type of thing. The 2 costs cheese as well as synergy with some other cards in standard, like Linessa, for example, if you want to try and put Linessa and Gorgon Zormu in your deck. Linessa will cast the cheese 2 times. Also, the other card on here, Tidepool Pupil. If you play your cheese, the pupil will remember the cheese. It's a spell, so you could get much cheese value from Gorgon Zormu. We mentioned on the reveal as well, this card is kind of worth playing after waiting a turn. The cheese is pretty good at that point. Obviously, you want to wait for it to get really, really big. I think it's going to be kind of like an Astalor type thing, where you're going to play Gorgon Zormu, and then you know at some point you're going to have to deal with 2 really big guys. A bit like you knew at some point with Astalor, you're going to have to take 12 damage across characters on your side of the board, so you'd have to build some sort of big board, and keep the board fairly big for the rest of the game. Now, this might be surprising to you, I've got Bumbling Bellhop on this 5-star range. I think this will go into the Taunt Warrior Druid package. There's a few cards I've got in that deck, and it's actually part of the reason why I put the Rift package in my variant of the deck, because that gives you 2 cards that, or specifically spells, that cost 5 or more. Which means my iteration of that deck, I think has 5 or 6 spells that cost 5 or more in it, and if you hit Bumbling Bellhop and get the copy of it, that's 3 mana 6/6 taunt. That's incredible stuff. Not forgetting as well that this could also be buffed by other taunt cards in your deck, and I think that is just going to be the bee's knees. It's going to be one of the big cards in that deck that stops these pesky aggro decks from killing you before you can get these Wensterosities out. So for those reasons, I think this is actually going to be a really good card in a tier 1 deck. I also think Big Spell Mage will run this, but, you know, Big Spell Mage won't quite reach those heights. Hosen Roughhouser, I think, will go into Shaman Demon Hunter, the parachuting pirate package. Therefore, I've also given it 5 stars as well. I'm a bit underwhelmed by the pirate package, actually, in general. I expected when we saw all these neutral pirates that one of the classes is going to have a really strong pirate deck. I suppose Demon Hunter does have it, but I thought maybe Rogue would have some more pirates as well to try and make their pirate deck work. I don't think these pirates that have been added will make Pirate Rogue much better. I think that will still, like, hover around the tier 4 deck. I actually tried to look up the stats on HS Replay earlier, and I couldn't even find it, so that's how much people are playing Pirate Rogue right now. Either way, I think it will go into the Demon Hunter package. I'm convinced that deck will be 5 stars. I've seen it as well on the Theory Crafting stream, And it's basically what I thought it was going to be. It is disgusting. It can kill you on turn 6. And typically if you're an aggro deck that kills people around turn 6, you're probably going to have at least a decent win percentage. And I think that this card might just cut into that deck. It's actually not one of the first cards I'm putting in it, but it's one of the latter cards. I think it'll make the cut. So, as I said, 5 stars. Adaptive Amalgam. Okay, I'm going to say my piece on this card. I think this is the card that I've seen the most theory crafting about of all of the cards. I think the most likely deck you're going to see this Immortal Prelate-like buffing a card and it being really good for the rest of the game. The most likely deck or class you're going to see this in is Hunter. Hunter has a lot of good ways to buff cards and have a way to cheat a 1-cost minion back out of your deck. And basically just tutor for Adaptive Amalgam. I'm here to tell you though, that is going to be too slow. It won't work. Like Immortal Prelate, it won't work, even though you can tutor for it because it's an amalgam and has tribes on it. It's also a 1-cost minion and there's 1-cost tutoring. But again, it's a meme. So why have I got it in 5 stars? It's a 1-mana dragon. It'll go into Zarimi Priest. I'm actually pretty convinced it will go into that deck, basically solely because it's an amalgam. Nothing to do with the Immortal Prelate effect, which actually will be beneficial for that deck, because if it dies, it goes back into the deck and you can fish it out again and it becomes another dragon again. Very nice. Also, that deck does do some minion buffing, so it might actually come back with some stats on it as well. For that reason, and also for the reason I think this is going to see a lot of play in a lot of different decks, including Warlock, including Warrior, including, I don't even know what. I've seen people running in Rogue as a mech Rogue deck and putting, you know, the containment unit on it as well to give it death rattle some of the big guy. It's going to be too slow, I'm telling you, it's going to be too slow, it's not going to work. But it's a dragon. 1-mana dragon, we'll see play. Finally, I have Concierge and Tidepool Pupil. I nearly put these in the 4-star category, but I've come to the conclusion this is going to see enough play in enough decks where they're going to try and cast a bunch of Drinkies that I've given them both 5 stars. I've bumped them up, even though I think the Druid Mage deck won't quite reach tier 1. I don't think the Hunter Warrior deck will quite reach... Well, I don't think it's going to reach tier 2, to be honest, for that deck. But I think Concierge will see play in enough decks that I think it's worth giving it a 5-star. Similar to Tidepool Pupil, even if you don't play it in one of these decks where you try and fire off a ton of spells and you cheat out a cheap spell, aka a 0-mana spell for Concierge, I think you might see it in some sort of get a big valuable spell. For example, the Gorgonzola cheese, as I mentioned, if you get another cheese from that, that's pretty good value. If you get the spell from Grifter as well, that's pretty good value as well for the Pupil. So I think these will see play in other decks other than just these machine gun off a ton of like spells, like a Miracle-esque deck. Then we get to 4-star land, and 4-star land is very interesting because the only card I've got in 4-star land is Grift the Trusted Vendor. I'm not convinced this will see play in a tier 1 deck. Maybe it will do. The 1-cost spell is useful for a few classes, like Priest, for example, has some good use of 1-cost spells. The Druid also has some good use of a 1-cost spell. If you do Mista Vista into Grift of the Trusted Vendor spell, you get the amulet off again in the future. It's also pretty good in Rogue because it's a 1-cost spell, so you can Water Dance it to get another copy of the amulet you get from it. So I think it's a really solid card. Unlike Gorgonzola, though, I don't think it quite has the same pull as that card, and I think more often than not it will be cut from that 30-card list. But I do think it'll get into a few tier 2 decks at the very least. Therefore, I've put it in the 4-star range, but don't be surprised if it's a 5-star card as well. Now we get to 3 stars, and I've got a few more in 3, but not that many more. I have Insidious, I have Lamplighter as well, maybe surprisingly, and Sailboat Captain, which actually is surprising me from where I rated it when I saw the reveal. Insidious, I think, is going to be too slow for most decks. I think you might run this in some sort of Death Knight Shaman deck, maybe. You might run it in Control Priest as well. Just some sort of deck where you can, you know, take your time, draw through your deck, and get the eruptions off. Because I think, in general, the deck is going to, the meta is going to be pretty fast again, and I don't think the Insidious cards will go off fast enough to deal with the aggro. So you need other cards to help you. I think this will be in some sort of slow burner of a deck. Therefore, I've given it 3 stars. I don't think it's going to be in a tier 2 or a tier 1 deck. Control Priest is like tier 3 right now. The Shamany control deck is around tier 2 to tier 3. Maybe it gets into that deck. I'm not convinced by it. It is an Elemental as well for Elemental Shaman packages, which aren't really being rated right now. But they typically hover around at best tier 3. Same with Elemental Mage. Which actually gets me to Lamplighter. I think this is actually a pretty good payoff for your Elemental decks, and actually might give them another kick up the backside and push them back onto the ladder again. I still don't think, though, it's going to be good enough to take it into the tier 1 range. Maybe one sneaks into tier 2, but I think it's more realistic that it's going to go into tier 3. I have seen some people speculating on some really, really memey decks with Rogue, for example. Elemental Rogue has been, like, put forward, and Elemental Priest. Because potentially you could Lamplighter, bounce it back with Shadow Step, and then use Water Dancer to play Lamplighter again, get a 0-cost copy of Lamplighter, play the other 0-cost of Lamplighter, and send them all to the face. And if you can get it to 10 elementals in a row, you win. You will just kill your opponent, unless they have armor. That's kind of the sticking point of this deck. Firstly, you're going to have to play elementals for multiple turns in a row, which is hard for Rogue because you don't have any good elementals, really, so you're going to be playing mainly neutral elementals. And secondly, I think Warrior and Druid is going to be a thing, and I think they're going to potentially be at more than 30 armor, or health even because of armor, more often than not. So I think this combo deck involving Lamplighter won't actually be a good enough thing. I think it's more realistically it's going to go into Elemental Mage or Elemental Shaman, and it's just going to help you try and get over the line. But I'm still not convinced by either of those decks actually pushing out something like Hand Buff Paladin, for example, or Flood Paladin. Finally, Sailboat Captain. I thought there was going to be a really good pirate deck. It turned out the pirate deck that was really good, in my opinion, is the Shaman Demon Hunter one. The Demon Hunter pirates are going to be typically fairly low statted. Occasionally you're going to be able to buff them up, but I still only seen them being, on average, like 1.8 attack stats. It'll occasionally at 1, sometimes at 2, very occasionally at 3. So I don't think you'll run Sailboat Captain in those decks. I just don't see it. I don't think it's enough of a pull. I think more realistically you're going to see this in one of the Amalgam decks where they try and give the Amalgam Wind Fury and, you know, generate Immortal Prelate Amalgam. And that's basically the reason why I've given it 3 stars. I think enough people will play that Amalgam that Sailboat Captain will actually have enough playtime that I think it's worth about a 3-star card. Also, I think some of those decks, for example, I think Hunter Warrior with the hand buff package maybe could make this Immortal Prelate thing work with the Amalgam because of the Fishing Rod. If you can bring that back with the Fishing Rod, you can give it Rush via the Parasite, and then you could give it Wind Fury with Sailboat Captain, and suddenly it is a really scary minion that keeps coming back and basically just clears your opponent's board at will. So for those reasons, I think Sailboat Captain I'm willing to put in the 3-star range. Then we get to 2-star. I've got a few cards in here: Terrible Chef, Beach Whale, Coconut Cannoneer, XB931 Housekeeper, Seaside Giant, Mixologist, and Drink Server. Terrible Chef I think might just see some play in the Warlock Death Rattle deck. I'm not entirely convinced by it though. It doesn't work on some of the cards which say, you know, you play a Death Rattle, it dies, and you get double the effect of it. That doesn't work with Terrible Chef because it summons the egg, doesn't play it. But there are ways to buff cards. Maybe you buff the egg instead and you just use the Terrible Chef as another good cheap card in that deck. I'm not sure it'll quite make the cut, so I put it into the 2-star range because I don't think if it makes that deck, it won't make any of the other decks. Beach Whale I think is a bit of a meme card. People will play it because of the 420 stat line. It's obviously a nice beast to cheat out. It's a big wall. But I've got a funny feeling because of the presence of Warrior and Druid, which are going to have these really big cards in it, people will tech in cards to deal with a single big guy. And Beach Whale is a single big guy for the most part. I also don't think this is a good enough taunt minion to put into your taunt Warrior Druid package. I think there are far better, more aggressive cards than this. Maybe Hunter does something with it as it is a beastie, but I'm just not entirely convinced by it. It's going to be really horrible though if this gets cheated out onto the board as a 420 taunt. Some decks will be really unhappy with that. Coconut Cannoneer was another card that I thought was going to be better than I've actually rated it. I think the fact that it has to be adjacent minions makes it a little bit awkward with the Parachute package, because the Parachute package is when the minions come onto the board, all go onto the right side of the board, so basically you need to get your minions out, then put the Coconut Cannoneer in between them, and then start attacking with them. But at the very least, it's kind of like, I see it's like a 2-mana 1/4 deal 2 damage. That's okay, but I just don't think it's necessarily good enough for standard right now. And I think there were other better cards in the 2-cost region that I put into those decks. And for those reasons, I've slotted it into the 2-star range. I also, as I said, don't think Pirate Rogue is going to get much better. And that's currently not actually rated, so I'm going to put it as like a tier 4-ish deck. I'm going to do XB931 Housekeeper and Seaside Giant somewhat together. I think a lot of people saw that package working in Druid, with the Druid location that refreshes on gaining armor. I think it's just too much of a meme. It's basically you're putting 3 cards into your deck. You need to draw them all together to get a very good benefit, It's a lot of cheating stuff out, but after that, what do you do with the rest of your deck? If you lose those cards, what happens? And I just don't know what package you would plug into the rest of your location Druid deck. By the way, I've actually made a location Druid deck potentially for the opening days of the set, and I'll see how that goes. It's basically just a value Druid deck. The other place that Seaside Giant may see some play, as I mentioned, is in Rainbow Death Knight, because their location can go off 5 times. And it's actually turning out, I was a bit worried about that location, that there weren't enough ways to kill minions quickly, because basically there wasn't a good Unholy package right now. It turns out that the Rainbow package is fine with the crop rotation and the mining casualties and the Ghoul's Knight. It turns out all those cards are enough aggression to get the location off multiple times per turn, and basically it's turning out to be 4 mana deal 15 damage, which is really, really strong, it turns out. So I've got that one wrong, but if you can get that location to go off 5 times, your Seaside Giant is suddenly a 5 mana card, and it comes up in a perfect moment for after you've played the location. You play a location on 4. If you can get all your minions to die and, you know, play through your entire location, Seaside Giant is playable on turn 5. That's going to be disgusting. 5 mana, 8/8. So there is a world to see some play, but I'm not quite convinced by it. I think it's a little bit too much of a reach right now. Similarly, Mixologist, there are a few 1-cost spell type rewarding decks. I mentioned Rogue could use it, Paladin could use it, potentially Hunter could use it with the Parrots, but I just don't think the payoff of Mixologist is good enough. Then again, I do think some decks maybe run it as like a 30th type of card, so I wouldn't be surprised to see it as a one-off. And in fact, actually Rogue getting this from Water Dancer could be pretty nice, because one of the potion effects is just straight damage to the face, and you'd love to Water Dance straight damage to the face. So there is a world where Mixologist does see some play in Rogue. And finally, Drink Serve, I've also got with a Rogue deck in mind. Maybe you want to generate a card from another class. One of the great cards from other classes you could generate right now is actually a drink. Even if it's a bad drink, it's 3 cards from other classes in 1 card. So maybe some Burgle Rogues might try this card. I think it's a bit too slow. I think some of the drinks are a bit too bad as well for that package. Like, if you get the Priest one, I think you've got really unlucky, because it's not a great card. I think instead you'll just run the Warlock drink and call it a day. It's an okay drink. It's not fantastic, but okay. And as I said, I just don't think you'll run Drink Server. If you had a Battle Cry, not a Death Rattle, maybe you would consider it, but there's too much stuff that could happen to a Death Rattle minion, so I've put it in the 2-star range. Maybe people will try it, but I don't think it'll make the cut. And finally, and least, we have the 1-star cards, which are on 2 different pages. We have AFK, Bloodsail Recruiter, Customs Enforcer, Dread Deserter, Resort Valet, Travel Agent, Weapons Attendant, Overplanner, Carry-On Grub, and Wavepool Thrasher here. And I'll get to the other ones on the next page. AFK I think is just too slow. Bloodsail Recruiter I don't think will make any of the pirate decks that exist currently in Standard. It is statted very nicely, but you're always susceptible to the decks that can just ping it with the button. So I just don't think this 4-1 stat line will live on the board. The last thing that something like Rogue got with like one of these very attack stat lines that was good was Fillet Pirate, Fillet Finisher, what's he called? I forgot his name. I was so confident I knew it. It's Fillet something. It's a 1-mana 3/1, I think, that did 1 damage. That sort of bit of play, but that was to enable combos, really. It kind of reminds me of a Magma Rager. And why does Magma Rager not see play? Yeah, the 1 health is a little bit volatile, so you do get a pirate with it, but the pirate pool is actually so big. There's actually quite a lot of bad pirates in the pool, so I don't think this card will be good enough to see play in Standard. Customs Enforcer might. I may have been a bit harsh on this card, but again, I just think there are better ways to disrupt probably spells, to be honest with you. Now, this is cards that didn't start in your deck that cost 2 more, so it could hit minions, weapons, locations. But I don't think you're going to have that often. I think it's really spells that are going to be the things that are generated from... you generate from, you know, the ether, aka they didn't start in your deck. And I think Customs Enforcer is just a little bit too expensive to put that into your deck over... I keep forgetting the minion's name, but the one that increases spells just by 1, not Stomper, but the other one. And I think you might run Stomper anyway, because at least that's tradable. If you don't want that card, you can put it back into your deck. Enforcer will just sit in your hand as a bad card if it's not good in the matchup. Dread Deserter actually surprised me. I thought this was going to be a really insane card. I thought Handbuff Paladin might run it. It would run it as well if it weren't for one thing. Leroy Jenkins exists. And it's basically, why would you play this and Leroy? I think you'll just play Leroy, and because of Leroy exists in Standard, Dread Deserter won't see any play. Watch this card, though. If Leroy rotates at the end of this cycle, which I I hope it does, Dread Deserter will suddenly like rise up the ranks to potentially like a 5-star card, because there won't be other ways to have neutral charge, probably. So yeah, watch this space in this card. I just don't think you'll see play right now because of another card that exists in there that just comes preloaded with charge without having to jump through a hoop first. Resort Valet is just going to be too random. It's too expensive for the random card discovered, and just discovering a card from the new set, the pool is simply too big. There are too many bad cards in the set, or too many cards that don't synergize with your class. Similarly, Travel Agent, I think discovering locations from other classes is going to be generally bad. I don't think the location pool is... it's not beige enough, I suppose, that it can go into every single class happily. Maybe some decks will try it. Maybe, for example, Burgle Rogue might try it to get a location from a different class, but I don't think they will. Weapons Attendant has some issues I talked about on the reveal. I don't think there's many great big weapons you want to cheat out right now, and it means you have to run a pirate package with it, which is actually kind of an expensive ask for a lot of classes, so I think it limits it down to, you might see this in Demon Hunter and Rogue, and that's about it. Overplanner, I've seen a lot of people putting this in their Theorycraft decks. This is like scrying, right, in Magic. I don't play basically any Magic, but I've played it like 1 or 2 times. Isn't that what scrying was, the keyword in Magic, where I think you looked at the top cards of your deck and put them either on the top or the bottom of the deck in any order. It's kind of like that, where you don't get to put them on the bottom, you have to put them on the top as an order of those 3 cards. I think it's pretty cool. It reminds me of Dredge, but in general, Dredge effects, without another good effect tied to them, didn't see much play. And for that reason, I don't think Overplanner will see any play. If it drew a card as well, it definitely would see play. But I think just shuffling 3 cards onto the top of your deck in a certain order that you've discovered in your deck isn't actually good enough. I think you need to draw with it. Bearing in mind you're playing a 3-mana 3/3 on top of it, which is not great stats for the cost. So for those reasons, I put it in the 1-star range. Like, the drawing standard right now is kind of giga insane, and I just think there are better things. You'd rather just try and draw through your entire deck than get these 3 cards that you might want or may not want. I also think the card would be improved if you could put some on the bottom as well, if you could choose whether or not they went onto the top or the bottom. Sadly, they have to go onto the top, so you could find 3 cards you don't really want, and you're fucked. You've made your next 3 draws really bad. At least you can know, though, and concede early. Carry On Grub is actually similar. I really like this card. I think it's a very interesting card, but I simply think too many classes have good draw options that you just won't play Carry On Grub. This does have synergies with, the cheap cost spells. It will work with Water Dancer. It works with Linessa as well. You don't have to play the Suitcase. You could draw 2 cards. There could be 2 cards you don't want. You just never play the Suitcase. Thins out your deck by 2 cards. I just think it's a bit too expensive. If this was statted as 2 mana 3/2, okay, now we're talking. But playing this on 4 with a 5/4 stat line, I think at that point in the game, your opponent, or even you, could be doing something a bit more disgusting than that. For example, with the Bellhop, you might get 6/6 with Taunt on turn 3, 1 turn earlier. If you respond with a Carry On Grub, who's the grub now? And then we have Wavepool Thrasher, which honestly, I have no idea how anyone is going to use this card in a proactive and good way. So I put it into 1 star. I just simply don't have a clue how you're going to use this as a good card. Then, the final 1-star cards, we have Scrapbooking Student, Snoozing Zookeeper, Bathing Bodybuilder, Octo-Masseuse, Package Dealer, Sleepy Resident, and Cryopractor. Scrapbooking Student is simply too expensive. Most of the locations are less than a 5-cost card, and I don't think many of them you want to copy. Sanctazel would be a funny, memey copy card, but I don't think Sanctazel is going to be that good. You could copy like the Death Knight location, which seems to have been doing wonders, but I think that's a bit too expensive. Again, it's one of those cards that if it was on a 3-mana 3/3, I think you would see play, but it's just too expensive at 5 to make. I think it's just too expensive to make any headwind in standard right now. You need to be doing something a bit more disgusting for 5 mana than just copying your location. Snoozing Zookeeper is too prone to going wrong, so it has some high rolls, but even the highest of high rolls I don't think is that cheaty for standard right now. But yeah, you may disagree. I've seen some people rating this card reasonably well, but your control decks will have better control options and more reliable control options than this card. Bathing Bodybuilder, I simply don't really understand. Maybe it's seen as a counter to the parachuting pirates, where Actually, it doesn't even work with that, really. It'd be like, it'd have to work with the parachuting pirates, where you make your opponent draw the cards, so they summon the pirates, and they just explode. I just think it's too expensive, the cost. You don't really need to silence too much stuff right now. Your opponent doesn't normally summon stuff on your turn, so you're trying to, like, dirty rat stuff out. That's probably the best bet for it, but you'd probably dirty rat and play some other single target elimination rather than Bafin Bodybuilder, in my opinion. So I've only got into 1-star territory. Optimus Zeus, if it worked with your Munga or whatever it's called from Hunter, would be a 5-star card. It doesn't, sadly, so it's a 1-star card. I don't see too many ways of abusing this card. The best card this card could attack is the 1-drop from Priest, which is whenever it takes damage, your face takes damage instead. You could blow someone up with that, but I think that package is going to be garbage anyway. Therefore, Optimus Zeus will also be garbage. Package Dealer is too expensive for, you know, maybe draw a card. That is definitely pack filler. Sleepy Resident as well. Death Rattle makes all the minions fall asleep. Could be good against aggro, but I think there are going to be better options of anti-aggro cards than your Sleepy Resident. And finally, Cryopractor. I nearly put this in my original list for Frost Death Knight, but I just think there are better ways to freeze cards in Death Knight, and this card will simply not make the cut in that deck. And there we have it. That is every single card from the new set rated by me. Now all I have to do is wait for about a week. I think it comes out on next Tuesday, which is, I think is the 23rd if I'm doing my maths correctly. And I will be playing some of the new cards. So join me then. Let me know in the comments below as well if there's any deck you want to see me play on that opening day, or any decks you think I've missed out. Like maybe I've just, you know, miscalled something, like there's another Druid deck out there that I've not mentioned. And maybe I will try and see to playing that deck as well. Just bearing in mind, I'm going to try and play decks with as many new cards in it. So if it's like, you're not playing Handbuff Paladin with this one new card, I'm not playing that deck. I will be playing something that has, like, ideally 5 or more of the new cards in it at the very least. Anyway, thanks for watching. I might do one more video on my top rated cards of the set, the most impactful cards of the set. I normally do that as well, but that will be the final video I do, and I expect to see it in a couple of days. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time. Bye.